So, JW, thanks for taking time with me.
My pleasure, Chuck.
So why don't you go ahead and tell me about you growing up and around wherever you grew up at. Just give me a little brief history and where you're from originally, and how you got in the Cincinnati music scene, and if you took a break for a while, which I know you did.
Yeah.
Just give us a little history.
Well, you know, when I grew up in a place called Ottawa, Kentucky, which is about 7 to 8 miles northwest of Renfrew Valley, and it's pretty much all rural country, farm country, and in that atmosphere, I got to hear a lot of music. You know, I remember crawling around on the linoleum floor listening to my mom play she had an old harmony flat top. You know, they were doing gospel tunes at that time, you know, and some of the country tunes. You know, Patsy Cline was out around that time, you know, and things like that. And my cousins, some of them played music. I had a couple uncles that played, one played banjo and the other one played fiddle. And my grandfather on my mom's side, he was a fiddle guy, you know. All farm people, but that's what they did in their, you know, leisure.
Yeah, to kill time and have fun.
Yeah, to get together and eat and play music, you know. So I grew up around that atmosphere, and I had two older brothers, and in the mid-'50s, you know, they were starting to pick up on like, you know, the Chuck Berry and Jimmy Reed and all those guys. And so I got to hear a lot of that music around the house because they would buy the 45s, and, you know, and they'd have their girlfriends over. And it was in around 1961 that we moved to Cincinnati. My dad got a job at Ford Motor Company, and my brothers, by that time, they were in their late teens, and they were playing, you know, with other musicians, and they'd bring them over to the house, and we had these jam sessions. You know, we had a room upstairs in this big house over in Hartwell, and the whole upstairs was empty, so that was the music room. I'll never forget, my brother brought home this old Sears and Roebuck reel-to-reel tape recorder. It's too nice. I mean, hours and hours of pleasure out of that thing. I mean,
you got any old masters?
He had some. Now he passed away a couple years ago, but I think his son still got some of the old reel-to-reel stuff of us just, you know, sitting around the house, jamming around Jimmy Reed and like there was groups, Bill Black's Combo, things like that, you know.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really in the band, but when I was about 10 years old, when we were playing down in Kentucky, they'd get their two guitars out, and one of them played harmonica and the other played guitar, and so they'd do their Jimmy Reed stuff, and they needed a drummer. So I had a 5-gallon Partridge lard bucket, you know, it's a big old tin bucket, and I'd put some newspapers on that and hit that. That was like a snare. So I'd keep that 2 and 4 for them going on the snare. You know, I was about 10 years old.
Right.
But I think I was getting hooked on it then, you know.
Yeah.
And so when we moved to Cincinnati, my cousin, he was lived up in Dayton, and he would come through Cincinnati. He used to do a Jerry Lee Lewis Little Richard act down here in Newport. At a place called the Jockey Club, and there were some rough places down here back then in the early 60s. And he played all of the swing bar.
What was his name?
Gary Burke.
Okay.
I think he played with a guy named Leon Moore. Now, these guys are all older than me, so they're probably still around, you know.
Yeah.
My cousin is, but he would be in, you know, at least 10 or 15 years older than me. But he would stop. We had a big old grand upright when we lived in Hartwell there. My mom, she played around on the piano, and he would stop down there and rehearse on his way to come down here to Newport and play. And I got to watching him, you know, and I thought, man, I kind of like that, you know. And so he would leave, and I'd try to copy some of the stuff I was watching him do on the keyboard. And of course, by then my brother was teaching me to play rhythm for him because my oldest brother got drafted and went in the Air Force. So he lost his rhythm guitar player. So he was teaching me to play, you know, the rudimentary blues stuff. And then my brother came back in the Air Force, and they were too old for me to hang out with, so they were like busting out of there without me. And I thought, man, I got to get myself somebody to play with, you know. So I found a note. I was working at a pony keg back then, you know, stock boy type thing, and I seen a note on there that they were looking for a rhythm guitar player, and they're all kids just like me, 14, 15-year-old kids. And that was my first, I called them up, we had a band. And I'll never forget the first gig we got paid for. I made $7.25 for playing this guy's backyard party.
It's usually how the first gig is.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool, man. And I was hooked in. Well, I can do this and make money. And I met a guy named Bill Riley, who I just played with last week. He's still playing. Cool. And he was in the first professional band I was in. It was a soul band. It was a 4-piece soul band. And I had to go get me a Farfisa organ, because I had a guy loaned me an old Wurlitzer, one of them old wooden Wurlitzer electrics, and I was using that for a while and playing. I had an old, my dad had found an old Melody Maker, Gibson Melody Maker, and a Fender Tremolux amp at a yard sale for I think $50 for both of them. Huh. And so that was my rig there,
A Melody Maker?
A Gibson Melody Maker and a Fender Vibrolux.
Vibrolux, okay.
Old tweed thing. And
so what'd you call that band, that first band?
The first one where we really played out and actually got paid for it was called Soul Pack.
Okay.
And we did we were doing all the James Brown, Aretha Franklin, all the soul stuff, Stack stuff and things like that. And of course the organ stuff, Booker T and I started listening to some jazz organists, Jimmy Smith, Jack McDuff, Jimmy McGriff, and I'll never forget, we were booking a lot of but they were like sock hops back then, and with Jim Scott and the guys from WSAI and all that, and we were booking with the Lemon Pipers. This is getting on up into the early 60s, and we were playing it, and I'll never forget it. And Bob Nath, I talked to him the other day, and I hadn't seen him in years, but he was my hero at that time. I was like, oh man, that Leslie. I'd sit over next to his Leslie. When after we got done playing, they'd get up, and I was playing a little Farfisa. I said, I got to get that, whatever that is. So I would say I dropped out of school, but I got kicked out of school, and I got me a job. I went and bought me a Hammond and a Leslie. And then,
Hammond B3 or what model was it?
It was an M3. Yeah.
M3? Yeah, that's what I had. That's where I recorded my album.
Yeah, it was a black ebony M3. Had the extra select tone presets on it. Some doctor owned it in his house. I bought it up at the Hammond place up in Montgomery. And I think I paid like $1,600 or $1,700 for that bad boy back then. And so that. Then we were rocking, I was in a really good band. We were doing. I'll never forget it. We had a trombone player and a trumpet player.
Yeah.
And we were doing the Chicago stuff, when it came out. Yeah. And then I got drafted and went to Vietnam.
Did you?
And I got back in '72 and. Floundered around for about a year and a half, and I had to get back in the music. Got another little lounge band type thing, and by then I'd started writing. When I was in Vietnam, for some reason or other, I started wanting to write things.
Get your emotions out with your art and lyrics.
And there was a bunch of guys in the Army with me that played. We buy these old Korean like $25 guitars at the PX, they're made out of plywood, and we'd sit around it, when we were in a safe place to do it, and play, just play whatever. And this one guy, we was playing this song. I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "That's one I wrote." And I like that. I think I'd like to write, So when I got back from Vietnam, I started, writing my own stuff, and I still continued to play in cover bands.
What's the longest you toured on the road for how many years? What was the most popular band or the band that you enjoyed the most?
I played in a band called Rushmore.
Rushmore?
Yeah, Rushmore. And we played, we started out doing, we had an agent that found us and we were pretty much, I think he had 3 other bands. But he set us up he bought the stuff we needed to get roadworthy. And he booked us down, down south and up and down south. Michigan and Indiana and West Virginia, North Carolina, you know, just going on down to Florida. And we did that for about 2 years. And I'll never forget, we signed a contract with a club up in Silton called Never on Sunday for 52 weeks straight, Monday through Sunday. We'd do 2 weeks, they had 2 clubs, and we'd do 2 weeks at one club and 2 weeks at the other one, which was over in Green Hills. Huh. 52 weeks. Well, we got done with that. We had to get out of town. It was like, we got to get out of here, man. You know, we were taking everybody home with us and everything else, but we knew everybody and their brother, you know, because it was just that way.
You developed a great local following.
Oh yeah,
playing there all the time.
And of course, when we left, they didn't like that, so they ended up, you know, we were out there calling us on the road. You got to get back up here. And we came back. And we worked for about another year with that, and then I was getting more into original material, and I was losing my, you know, I just didn't want to travel. I didn't want to
live the life of the road anymore.
Yeah, and doing other people's material. I never thought, well, we're never going to do it as good as they did it. They're the original, you know. And so I started thinking like that, and so then I started really thinking about working in an all original band, you know. And so I started writing and honing things together that I thought were, you know, you mimic whatever you think's working, you know, like Leonard Skinner. I'd write songs like that, and I'd write maybe a country song or something like that. So I was trying to find my way, you know, of what I was writing. But I hooked up with a guy named Carl Gregory and Gary Bates and Rick Shelley. Rick Shelley's a drummer. He still plays around. Great guy, great friend of mine. And Gary Bates and Carl Gregory, we were like brothers. We worked for probably a couple of years just doing solid original material. Maybe throw in a Blackfoot or something like that once in a while just to and kind of tool it our way. But that was big fun. And that took me through, you know, pretty much through the mid 80s. And then I decided it was time to raise the family that I'd scattered around a little bit there.
So what'd you do for your job, or different jobs?
I got into the glass industry. I did that for about 10 years. I had my own little glass business, you know, doing a little neighborhood shop up in Norwood. You know.
Cool.
But I always, even though I had that, I never could really dedicate myself to anything else. But it was always like second to my music. I was always going out and playing with people, sitting in, doing whatever I could to stay in it.
Yeah.
And in 1994, I was playing with Carl and them. We were in a band called Wolf Raven. We did a lot of shows at Bogart's, and we warmed up for some people like Edgar Winter and Amanda Cody and people like that. And but we didn't have any product to sell or anything like that.
Yeah.
And this guy called me from Middletown, Rob Hoffman, and his drummer had heard some of my music and told him, and he was starting a record company and called Alpha Dog Records. And they had a little band called Uncle Dan and the Family Secret. And he said their keyboard player was getting ready to go on the road with a group called Yankee Gray, who had a couple hits on the country charts.
Yeah.
And so I went out and heard them, and of course they blew me away. I was like, oh my God! And they were doing originals, some of his originals, and he said he was interested in doing some of mine, and. But the keyboard player just scared me to death. I thought, well, ain't no way I'm gonna go up there. You know, I'm not that kind of keyboard player. Blah blah blah. You know? And he called me. He called me for a year. He wouldn't give up trying to get me up there because I was chicken to go up there play. Jerry Hughes was the keyboard player. He's a magnificent artist, singer. You know, just roly poly. And so he talked me into coming up there. You know, I was all nervous about it, and I was kind of still timid about presenting my material, you know. I mean, a whole lot of confidence about it, but he had me play some of this stuff, and he said, well, we're going to do that one, and we're going to do that one, and we're going to do, and the band started working it up, and we ended up recording it on one of the first, actually the second Uncle Daddy album. I had 2 songs on that.
That you wrote?
Yeah.
And that was with
Uncle Daddy and the Family Secret. Yeah.
huh.
And then that same year, I think it was 95 or 96, there was an independent film crew here in town filming a film over here in Newport. And a friend of mine was on the camera crew. And he said, "Hey, J-Dub," he said, "what are you doing?" I was at work, you know, I was in my office, and he called me up. He said, "What are you doing this afternoon?" I said, "Well, no, I'm playing tonight." I said, "I'm playing over at Southgate House with Uncle Daddy." He says, "Great, man. We'll bring a couple CDs and come down to the Brass Ass." He said, "You know where the Brass Ass is?" I said, "Yeah, I'm good there." Yeah. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "We're shooting a bar, you know, a scene in a bar there." And he said, the producer of the movie's going to be down there, and he's looking for some original music." And I said, "That's fat." So I loaded up and went down there and stood behind the scenes and watched him film for a minute. And when he got done, he introduced a producer to me, Paul Geiger. And he said, "Yeah, I'm looking." He says, "Now is this?" He says, "This stuff, can I use?" He says, "You got the rights on it and all that stuff?" I said, "Well, either I do or the other writer does, you know." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, cool." He says, and Rick, my buddy Rich Fredette, he said, "Well, J-Dub's playing down, you know, they're playing down Southgate House, you know." And he says, "Well, good, I'll just bring the whole crew down there tonight." And I thought, that ain't gonna happen, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's the chances of that happening? Sure enough, we're up there playing. I see about 10 or 15 people walk in, and it was him. He walked in and took up a big bunch of tables and stuff, you know, and bought like 8 or 10 CDs, you know. It was great. And then after the show, he came up and he says, he said, "I've already got a couple in mind, you know." He said, "But I'm gonna give you a list and I'll give you a call." And I was like, whatever, you know. I've had so many things come and go, you know.
Right.
People going to do this and do that.
Yeah.
By that time, I was a little jaded.
Right.
But sure enough, about a month later, he calls me up and he says, "Yeah, I'd like to use your song on the opening track to the movie, you know, and the title, you know, coming into the movie, and I'll use part of one of the other ones on a radio spot in the movie, you know."
Cool.
And that was just a gas, you know, when that happened. Of course, we went to the opening and all that stuff, and they did a good job on it. It was a nice local independent. It was called April's Fool.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah,
What?
April's Fool is the name of the movie. They used some local actors and of course crew, you know, film crew.
Yeah.
And Paul's from California. He does special effects out there, and he's from Western Hills, so he kind of had and he used some of his family. You know, it's one of them pet project things. You know, I think that he just did for love.
That's the great thing, like what I do with my documentaries and my show.
Exactly.
Well,
and,
cool.
Yeah. But, and then, you know, being around this area, Rob kept pushing me to get out on my own and do some other things. Now, Uncle Daddy's been together 14 years. We've all, it's unbelievable. But he wanted me to get out and do more things, so I started going around and I ended up here. You know, a friend of mine, Bob Logston, said, "You ought to come down to the Mansion Hill, you know, to the jam." And here I am, you know, playing my originals on a Monday night with John Riddell, and just the greatest bunch of people you'd ever meet in your life.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
that's for
and
sure.
you as well. Met you here.
Thank you.
You know,
Appreciate that.
I came in and seen you playing keyboards.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Well, what's your and then we'll end. What's your most meaningful song your favorite that you've written? You think that might be a hard one.
Well, I did it tonight, actually. I always do that song because I feel like I need to do it to remember where I came from, Ottawa, Kentucky. And I like to kind of open up with that. It settles me down a little bit. You know, it makes me realize that, you know, that's a place where a lot of my ancestors are from, and you know, and that's probably where I'll end up.
That's where you'll be buried.
Probably more likely be there.
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, thanks for your time. Let me get a shot of it with you. JW, I appreciate your time.
All right, brother.
And great playing tonight, man.